Okay, friends, it's everyone's favorite time of the year. It's almost April 15th, and everyone knows what that means. It's time to pay your taxes, yes! Man, is April 15th a painful time of the year for everyone. We get to look at the prior year in retrospective, see how much we paid into the system. April 15th is a wonderful reminder that yes, we are indeed shelling out shitloads of money to help fund the federal government. And if you live in a state with income tax, you get to fund the state too. Whoop-de-doo! Of course, everyone hates this time of the year. Everyone hates forking over their money. I cannot think of a single person who files their taxes and thinks to themselves, man, I only paid 40% or 30% or whatever I'm paying in taxes. Ah, man, I wish I could pay 60 or 70%. I just wish I could give the government more money. Quite literally, everyone hates paying taxes, which is crazy, right? Because the outrageous disconnect between people who want the government to have more money and people who don't want to pay taxes is extreme. Think about all these people that think, oh yeah, we need more government programs, the government needs more power, vote bigger government, it'll get more power, it'll do things right. And then when tax season comes around, they obviously want to pay less in taxes, right? It's unfortunate that it's not common sense and that ordinary people know that the government doesn't just inherently make money, because the government makes no money. Because if it did and it was able to prop itself up with no problems, it wouldn't have to tax us, right? So when the government makes no money on its own and people want to expand government programs, they just think that there's going to be this infinite money tree and people in government can just go pick it off the tree. Ooh, there's a Benji green over here. Let me go grab that. Ooh, $50 over here. Come here, Grant. Like, no, you dipshits. That's not how it works. The government doesn't really do anything. It just acts as a middleman that we can really just cut out, or at least significantly reduce. Anyway, all rants aside, obviously ChatGPT and Grok have become pretty prevalent in our society today, at least among the younger crowd. And while I was filling out my taxes for this year, which of course I've only just done now, because, you know, who the fuck tries to do their taxes earlier than they have to? I mean, it's so fucking annoying, right? Because if you over withhold, you're basically going to get a refund, and the government holds it, and the only way to get your money back as fast as possible is to file your tax return as soon as possible. Oh boy, we love filing our taxes as soon as possible. I had this thought to myself while I was doing my taxes this year. Could Grok or ChatGPT be any good at taxes, or maybe could it even help people with that? The most important thing I have to say is, obviously, I'm not a CPA. Don't take tax advice from me. I'm just looking at a tool that might be able to help the average person, and it could be fun to play around with. This is not supposed to be serious financial advice or anything like that. Okay, so we'll try this again. This time we're only going to use Texas, New York, and California, and we're going to compare single people who have salaries of $40,000, $65,000, $90,000, and $135,000 respectively. We're also going to look at people who are self-employed and employed through W-2. The main difference is when you're self-employed, you generally have to pay more taxes. For those of you who don't know and have a W-2, Social Security and Medicare are supposed to tax you at 15.3%, but there's an agreement between employees and employers that you'll split it down the middle and you end up both paying 7% respectively. The problem when you're self-employed is now you're the employer and the employee at the same time, so you have to pay both parts of it, and it's really fucking brutal if you're ever self-employed. You generally end up paying thousands of dollars more in taxes, and it makes you want to cry in the corner. I know it says $15,000 here. We're going to go back to 2024 for $14,600. So with the $14,600 standard deduction, which you'd get for just having a pulse, and by the way, Trump made this $10,000 originally in 2016, I think. Let's not forget the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which Trump had put in his first term, gave us the blessing of putting in $12,000 of standard deduction for doing absolutely nothing and just existing for individual filers. Hell fucking yes. So, looking at someone who has $40,000 worth of salary and they're a W-2 employee, $40,000, you take it with the standard deduction. This is how much the government can tax you on. And with the various calculations, you get to this number of $2,800. Then you look at your FICA taxes, Social Security, you pay the 7% that you do as the employee, and you get $3,000. Texas, $0. Hell fucking yes. New York and California are pretty similar with $1,000. So the total tax burden for people in Texas is $5,800, and these two are much closer to $7,000. Now, self-employed people at $40,000. You do $40,000 minus the standard deduction, and then you do the self-employment deduction, which is the employer half of the deduction, because as an employer, when you pay taxes, it's an expense, so you get to write it off. So taking that away, you do $22,574, and you get to this innocent little number of $2,476. Notice how the self-employment was $5,652, and when we go back up to the non-self-employed person, it was $3,060. So that right there is pretty criminal in itself. It quite literally almost doubles just because you're self-employed, and that's $2,000 worth of difference. So the total tax burden for someone from Texas is $8,100, and it's $1,000 extra for these two states. So when we look at $8,100 and we compare it to someone who paid $5,800, that's what, $2,300 extra in taxes? It might not sound like much, but do you really want to give $2,300 out of your pocket just for the hell of it? You know you're never going to see it again. Yeah, that's what I thought. So someone who has $65,000 $90,000 worth of salary. Let's do this. Bracket, Social Security and Medicare, total. They pay $11,000. Self-employed pays $14,000. The difference between states is only $2,000 at this point. And if you're self-employed, it starts to be closer to $3,000. Because don't forget, states will also impose self-employment taxes on you, and it's not fun. So if you're making $90,000, your total tax burden in Texas is $16,000, and if you're in New York and California, now it's $5,000 extra. That's pretty significant. Self-employment will make you cry because now it's $27,000, and the states will impose a only $4,000 extra in taxes. So at $90,000, you're paying $27,000 versus $16,000. That's fucking $11,000 extra. That's almost like, what, 160%? That's fucking disgusting. Of course, self-employed people get to take deductions on things they spend money on, so this is the worst it would ever be. I can't think of a scenario where someone who's self-employed isn't spending some money on something that isn't necessary to their business and they're just having money pile in theory, we'd at least hope it's a lot less because there will be deductions being taken. Now you're making a whopping $135,000. You pay $10K into FICA taxes, Social Security, and Medicare, and you pay $31,000 ordinarily. New York and California take a whopping $8,000 or $9,000 away from you. So when you make $135,000, you're not really making $135,000 because you've paid $41,000 away from it. And if you're in New York and California, it could be almost $50,000, which is pretty disgusting. Now we look at the self-employed side. This is going to make you cry a little. If you're in Texas, you're going to pay $47,000. $20,000 of it will be towards Social Security and Medicare, and $28,000 will just be in the ordinary bracket. Ouch. Ouch, 135 suddenly becomes just under 90 take home. So here's a fun little chart summary that I told it to make as well. Texas, your grand total is this. New York, your grand total is this. California, your grand total is this. Self-employed, 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 and no deductions. So you can see, obviously, if you live in a state with no income tax, you save a few $1,000s if you're making a kind of ordinary average salary. If you're making a pretty healthy salary or even a very nice salary, now you're starting to really see some pretty big differences. Do you really want to be paying $8,000 just for the hell of it, even though you're making $135,000 a year? No, obviously not. You can go do something with that money instead of just pissing it away into the state's endless budget. If you're making over this much money salary in life, then Social Security stops being an issue, and then only Medicare will tax you infinitely. And this 70% suddenly becomes like 1%, basically. And something I actually didn't notice until Grok pointed it out is that when you get into this really higher bracket, California is actually paying more than New York is when it comes to state taxes. You might think 8% or 7% is kind of laughable, or even 4 or 4.5% are. But when you add that on top of your 30 or 35 or 20 or whatever percent you're paying, it's just a giant pain in the ass when you group them all together. So the whole point of this video was to just kind of show you that Grok can actually be a pretty useful breakdown tool, an income calculator, if you prompt it to kind of do it for you in a certain manner. Again, this is only for generalities. I wouldn't start doing it if you have complex tax returns necessarily. Maybe it can kind of point you in the right direction. Of course, you should always try and work with the CPA at the end of the day because they can see the whole picture generally, not everyone of course, but they have a better idea of how to save you taxes in the long run. If you're going to pay $1,000 or $2,000 to a CPA, but they save you $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, or $15,000 in taxes, it's worth it in an investment because you still come out on top a few $1,000s extra. And the additional benefit of not giving the government more money is that they won't be giving those guns or arms to Ukraine because you decided to not chip in and you decided to pay a CPA, which is fantastic. Now, obviously for fun, I've decided to ask Grok to do my taxes for me, which it says it can't, but it's a guide, not a tax preparer with a login to the IRS, obviously. Obviously, I'll ask you your income, what state you're in, filing status, deductions that you want to take, and if you have anyone that you can claim. I'm a single guy. Most of the viewers on this channel are between 25 and 35 years old, so a fair amount of us will probably be single. I'm sure I could run the numbers on some married filing jointly people or some other circumstances, but overall I just tried to show you how you can kind of use it, and there's probably more creative ways to do it than I can.